I sold it all for cash, my sister said with a satisfied smile. Honestly, Linda, you should be thanking me. I couldn't answer. I just stood in the doorway of my 15-year-old son Ethan's bedroom, staring at 4 bare walls where his whole childhood had been less than a week ago. The bed his father built with his own hands was gone. The dresser, the bookshelves, the baseball trophies, family photographs, quilts my mother had stitched. Every book, every drawer, every lamp. Even the curtains had disappeared. Sunlight poured through the uncovered windows, making the room feel colder than any place I'd ever stood. Ethan stepped beside me without saying a word. He looked around once, lowered his duffel bag onto the floor, and quietly backed into the hallway. That silence hurt more than tears ever could. Just an hour earlier, we'd been driving home from a church retreat outside Knoxville, Tennessee, talking about the fish. Ethan almost caught in laughing at stories from the youth pastor. Now our home didn't even feel like ours. Denise folded her arms as though she'd completed a successful project. That room was packed with junk, she said. I cleared it out while you were gone. People paid good money for everything. I had given her a spare key for one, reason only, to water my plants, feed the cat, and collect the mail. Never once had I given her permission to touch my son's belongings. My first instinct was to scream, but I've lived long enough to know anger solves very little. Instead, I reached into my purse, took out my phone, and began photographing every inch of the empty room. Denise actually laughed. Go ahead, she said. You'll realize I did you a favor. I ignored her. Every photograph captured more than missing furniture. It captured broken trust. Then my eyes stopped where the cedar chest had always rested beneath the window. My knees nearly gave out. Inside that chest were the last, handwritten letters my husband left for Ethan before cancer took him. His grandfather's Purple Heart medal, our family Bible, old deeds, photographs that existed nowhere else, and memories no insurance company could ever replace. In that moment, I stopped seeing this as a cruel family argument. I realized my sister hadn't simply emptied my son's room. She had stolen pieces of our family's history, and I quietly promised myself I would recover every single one, or prove exactly who took them. The next morning, I made myself a cup of coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and looked at the photographs I'd taken the night before. My hands were steady now. Crying wasn't going to bring Ethan's belongings home, and arguing with Denise certainly wouldn't. I needed facts. Ethan walked into the kitchen, poured himself a bowl of cereal, and quietly asked, "What do we do now?" I looked him in the eye and said, "We start with the truth." He nodded once, and that was enough. After he left for a friend's house, I opened the security camera app on my phone. We'd installed the porch. Camera the previous year after a few packages disappeared from our neighborhood. I had almost forgotten about it. As the recordings loaded, my stomach tightened. There was Denise unlocking my front door less than an hour after Ethan, and I had left town. Trip after trip, she carried furniture, boxes, lamps, and bags onto the porch, while different pickup trucks pulled into my driveway. She greeted every buyer with a smile, pointing at items as though she owned every inch of my house. I saved every video clip before she could somehow make them disappear. Then I took a legal pad and wrote down everything Ethan and I could remember. His baseball glove, his guitar, his school awards, his father's fishing rod, the handmade quilt, his desk, his books, the cedar chest. The list stretched across 3 pages. By lunchtime, I had copied license plate numbers from the videos and started knocking on doors. Most people were kind. An elderly couple returned Ethan's desk the moment they learned the truth. A retired teacher handed back 2 boxes of books and whispered, "Bless your heart." We had no idea. Another man refused the money. I'd offered him for the lamp he'd purchased. "Your sister said it all belonged to her," he admitted. "That ain't right." Every conversation gave me another receipt, another text message, another witness willing to tell the truth if necessary. By evening, my dining room held several recovered belongings, but the cedar chest was still missing. As I stood on my front porch watching the sun sink behind the trees, my 80-year-old neighbor, Mrs. Harper, slowly crossed the yard with her cane. She looked around to make sure no one else was listening before leaning close and quietly saying, "Linda, there was one buyer who came back after everyone else had left, and he drove away with that cedar chest." Writing. Mrs. Harper's words echoed in my mind all night. He drove away with that cedar chest. I barely slept. Every time the old house settled or rain tapped against the tin roof, I pictured my husband's letters disappearing forever. Before sunrise, Mrs. Harper knocked gently on my screen door. In her hand was a folded piece of paper. "I couldn't stop thinking about it," she said. "I wrote down part of the truck's license plate that day. My grandson helped me remember the rest," I thanked her, tucked the paper into my purse, and drove straight to the county sheriff's office, not to file criminal charges yet, but to ask how I could identify the owner. They explained the matter was likely civil, unless further evidence showed fraud, but an officer pointed me toward a local attorney who could help. By noon, working with the attorney and matching the partial plate to the security footage, we found the buyer. His name was Harold Benson, a retired mechanic who lived about 20 miles outside town. When I arrived at his modest brick home, he greeted me politely. I introduced myself and explained why I was there. The color drained from his face. "Your sister told me she inherited everything in that house," he said quietly. "I bought the chest because it reminded me of one my parents owned. I never even opened it." He led me into his garage. There it stood beneath a canvas tarp. My heart nearly stopped. Harold peeled back the cover and stepped aside. I reached under the lid, where my husband had hidden the tiny brass key years earlier. My hands trembled as I unlocked it. The familiar scent of cedar drifted into the air. Inside were my husband's final handwritten letters to Ethan. His wristwatch, our family Bible, old photographs, insurance papers, property records, and Ethan's grandfather's Purple Heart medal. Nothing had been touched. Tears filled my eyes, but I refused to let them fall until I closed the lid again. Harold wouldn't accept $1 when I offered to repay him. "The right thing isn't always the easy thing," he said. Back home, I photographed every item, placed the chest in a secure closet, and organized every receipt, video, and witness statement into labeled folders. That afternoon I called Denise and calmly told her the cedar chest had been recovered. She laughed and said, "You got lucky?" I answered, "No, Denise. I found the truth." The next morning, my attorney reviewed every document, looked directly at me and quietly said, "Linda, your sister's biggest mistake wasn't selling your property. It was leaving this much evidence behind." When my attorney said, "Your sister's biggest mistake wasn't selling your property, it was leaving this much evidence behind," I finally believed the truth had a chance to win. He carefully arranged everything. Across the conference table, inside his office near the county courthouse, there were photographs of Ethan's empty bedroom, security camera recordings, receipts from buyers, screenshots of Denise's online listings, witness statements, and pictures of every item recovered from the cedar chest. He looked at me and smiled slightly. "You stayed calm," he said. "Most people would have argued first and collected evidence later." 2 weeks after filing the lawsuit, Denise was officially served with court papers. She called me that evening before I had even finished cooking dinner. "You're actually taking your own sister to court?" she demanded. "I asked you to return what you took," I replied. "You laughed instead. She claimed she had already spent every $1 and insisted the judge would see she had only been trying to help." I ended the conversation without raising my voice. A month later, Ethan and I walked into the old county courthouse. The wooden benches creaked as people found their seats. The room smelled faintly of old paper and furniture polish, and a ceiling fan turned slowly overhead. Denise avoided looking at us. When the hearing began, she told the judge she believed I wanted the room cleaned out because I had complained about clutter. Then my attorney stood. He played the security footage showing Denise unlocking my front door, directing buyers into my driveway and accepting cash. He presented the marketplace messages where she claimed every item belonged to her. Mrs. Harper testified she had watched trucks come and go for hours. Harold Benson explained how Denise convinced him the cedar chest was part of her inheritance. Several buyers described returning Ethan's belongings the moment they learned the truth. Finally, the judge turned toward Denise. "Can you provide any text message, email, letter, or witness proving your sister gave you permission to sell her son's property?" Denise shuffled through her papers, whispered to her attorney, and slowly shook her head. "No, Your Honor." The courtroom fell silent. The judge removed his glasses, looked down at the file one last time, and folded his hands together. "The evidence before this court leaves very little room for doubt," he said. "I have reached my decision." Ethan quietly reached over and held my hand as the judge picked up the written order that would decide whether truth or betrayal would have the final word. The courtroom became so quiet, I could hear the old clock ticking behind the judge's bench as he unfolded the written order and looked toward my sister. Based on the evidence presented, he began, this court finds that the defendant knowingly sold property she did not own and had no legal authority to sell. Denise lowered her eyes without saying a word. The judge ordered her to pay restitution for every item that could not be recovered, return any remaining property still in her possession, and cover all court costs. That was it. No dramatic speeches. No shouting. Just the calm weight of the truth written into the record. I thanked my attorney, nodded respectfully to the judge, and walked out of the courthouse with Ethan beside me. Over the following weeks, phone calls began coming from people across the county. One family returned Ethan's baseball trophies after finding my number on the court paperwork. A retired schoolteacher brought back 2 photo albums, refusing to accept reimbursement. Another gentleman delivered the handmade quilt my mother had sewn years before, saying he could never keep something that carried another family's history. Not everything came home. Some things had already changed hands too many times. But the court's restitution helped replace what could be replaced. The things that truly mattered had survived because decent people chose honesty over convenience. One cool October evening, Ethan carried the cedar chest onto our front porch. Crickets filled the quiet air, and the porch swing creaked gently beneath us. He unlocked the chest, unfolded one of his father's final letters, and read it silently from beginning to end. When he finished, he carefully placed the letter back inside, closed the lid, and looked at me with a peaceful smile I hadn't seen in years. Dad wanted me to grow into a good man, he said softly. I think he already knew you would help me. I reached over and squeezed his hand. We never spoke badly about Denise again. We simply let the truth stand where everyone could see it. Family invitations became fewer for her. Not because I asked anyone to choose sides, but because trust, once broken, is slow to return. Ethan and I rebuilt his room together, filling it with hope instead of bitterness. Looking back, I realized furniture can be replaced. Money can be earned again. But character is built one choice at a time. Some things can be sold for money, but respect is something you only get to lose once.